Welcome back to Natural 2. Time once again for our tabletop and D&D talk show. Never scripted, always from the heart. I'm James. This is Nathan. So good to be here. Uh, like
We're
earnestly.
walking out on stage.
Honestly, I feels good. It feels good. Uh, I love it. I love talking about this hobby.
Well, what are we
And
talking about today, James?
I'm glad you asked. So today, this is inspired, cards on the table. This is inspired by a Reddit post, um, that we're not going to link and I'm not going to credit.
There you go. That's the
I
spirit.
just want, I just want you to know, uh, the like I'm ethical, but I'm not so ethical.
I don't
Uh,
think that's a term.
well, it is now, and I came up with it. Original work,
Mhm.
no plagiarism here. Uh, I wanted to talk this week about pet game mechanics or pet game facets or things that just they're in your brain and it's like, gosh, I'm obsessed with this and it sounds so fun to me and not to anybody else apparently.
Mhm.
Things that are you're specifically sort of alone in. Just man, my ideal game is filled with this, but nobody else really cares that much.
Yeah, the way that I conceptualized it when you first sent it to me was like it's the fantasy of your fantasy game, like what you wish you could make your game be, but no one else wants to.
Yeah, something that you really want to include, but it isn't, the juice is not worth the squeeze for the entire group
Mhm.
necessarily. So we've been back and forth a little bit before we started rolling about what our pet pet issues are.
Well, James knows
Uh,
mine, like that. It was not a mystery by any means.
I'm not. Yeah, I said, hey, what about this idea for a topic? You're going to talk about this, I'm
Yep.
sure. But yeah. Um, for me, we'll start with mine, just because I think it's probably the simpler of the two, or it's the least, it's kind of a straightforward thing, really. I love sidekicks. I always like whenever we meet NPCs, there's some part of my brain, there's a subroutine that analyzes, like, can we recruit this person?
What skills could they bring to the table?
What skills do they have?
Mhm.
Would they be fun to have around? Is Nathan's voice for them super annoying?
That's the most
So
important factor.
it has been a factor in the past. That's not even a joke. It's been like, man, I don't want to, I don't want to talk to this NPC very much. Um, so I always am thinking that, NPCs may as well be Pokemon, right? I want to catch them and have a menagerie of NPCs. And I bought, I don't remember the title off the top of my head. I bought one of the official Splat books, like one of the official expansion books.
Is it Volo's guy that has the sidekick mechanic in it?
It's one of those. I think
hmm
it might be Velos.
hmm
Um,
Which I've actually used once or twice. I think.
yeah, and I bought that book when it came out
Mhm,
only for those sidekick rules.
mhm.
Everything else that was in that book was a bonus. Um, and before that book came out, because I didn't know that book was coming, I bought there was like a starter set thing, a kit that they put out that was the first item they published that had the sidekick rules in it. And it came with some little cards, like some little NPC cards and the adventure was built around, like, meet these characters, maybe recruit them. I don't for me, it's a power fantasy.
Mhm.
D&D is a power fantasy. It's a game about power and fantasy. And for me, that's very much a part of it because in real life, I'm not in charge of jack. Nobody wants my, you know,
Mhm. You're in charge of doing the
I
dishes.
it's yeah, it's that here I'm gonna date myself here. Here's a reference for you guys. It's that Matchbox 20 song. I wonder what I would do if I was the head honcho. Uh, and they all just did what I said. And I want to bring that into the game really bad. Um and the game's always had like there have always been rules for hirelings and things like that, but it's never been, it's never nobody very few people ever seem to build it out beyond like yeah, they carry your gold back to town or they hold like in the early editions my first DM who's so hung up on like first edition would talk about how you would hire a guy to
Come get
hold
the
the
yeah.
torch
Mhm.
and that's it. That's all he do.
Mhm. Well,
He's the
otherwise you're
torch.
holding the torch, and then you can't
He's
be
the
doing all
torch
these
bearer. Yeah,
actions.
that's it. He just stand there and hold the torch while I fight this fiendish monstrosity. Uh, but I want a crew,
Mhm.
you know, like an actual crew, like a Star Trek freaking crew.
Mhm.
But it is a lot to keep up with. It's a lot of work, and in most of the groups that I've been in, most of the campaigns that I've played in, it for everybody else at the table, understandably, it's just all right. This is what I'm doing. Me, my character. Not so much like I'm gonna build the A team.
Mhm.
Uh,
I think the issue you usually run into, and this is like kind of looking back at Ismilia for our group, is the DM doesn't want to push forward the sidekicks as much because then he's kind of like dictating the flow of things or almost like pointing the party in a certain direction or like eliminating some of the exploration aspect. And then there's the other side of just if you have too many or too many options or too many tools, you kind of forget or they fall to the wayside. Because at one point we had like a whole little company that was following you guys around. You had like a scholar and a healer and like your animal handler and all this kind of stuff. And so when you get to the point where you have all the player characters to worry about and whatever NPC that's along for the mission you're doing and all the NPC sidekicks, it's like people just get forgotten about. I think that was the biggest issue during that. So you really, I think sidekicks are a lot more effective in smaller games, like even if it's like a solo game or a duet game, or if you have like two people in your party. But I think the trap you might fall into is then you just kind of have a DM NPC or DMPC is I think what they call them. So it's a bit of a fine line to walk, and I could understand why it's not applied broadly across all the different games because it is a lot of plates to juggle.
it's a lot to ask of the DM. It's a lot of work to do it well. Um, and of course, everybody remembers that incredible scene in the Lord of the Rings: Return of the King when Aragorn is painstakingly analyzing the traits of who's going to command the individual units of the army. But I I don't know. I just love it. I really think it does have a lot to do with like I came up on uh stuff like Star Trek and Burn Notice and these shows that were very much like they were about the ensemble. They were about the team working together. And you had the people in the forefront, and then you had the people that you only saw for a minute at a time before they were gone again. And just, I like a supporting cast. I like a strong supporting cast in the campaign.
hmm I think the other side of the coin that's a little bit of a difficulty as far as like both players that enjoy bringing this in and then DMs that are kind of burdened with bringing it in is you have to prevent any of these sidekicks or these NPCs becoming some sort of meme or reoccurring gag. Because as soon as that happens, then any sort of like validity or weight they might have carried is gone, and it's very easy for like one wrong misstep or one interjection to make them the butt of every joke. That was something that we ran into a few different times where like I would try to push forward one of the sidekicks to like try and make a recommendation, and everyone else was like, we don't want to hear from you ever again, so you now are dead to us. And it's like, that's good.
It's if we do an episode about pet peeves, I think one of mine would be the tendency that practically all D&D groups have of forcing memes and creating running gags and just latching onto things and never ever letting go, no matter how old it gets.
Hmm.
Uh, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I've never done it, but gosh, take it from me, you out there, chances are there's a joke that your party keeps making, and your DM or even somebody else in the group like me is like, yeah, whoa, that's some funny stuff right there.
Yes, it is fully possible to beat a horse to death.
Yes, yes, it is.
But,
Anyway, I think that covers mine.
mhm.
Now I'm excited to hear from you. I'm
So
excited to tear your idea apart.
mine is simple, but I think is so, I don't know, like more interesting, like across the board in like so many different assets of the game. Basically, it boils down to I enjoy a lot more low fantasy, realistic, kind of gritty stuff, and I think I immediately want to like separate it from like I'm not talking about like getting really nitty gritty into the like mechanics or like every coin's weight has to be accounted for. You have to make sure every single arrow you fire, you make sure like that kind of stuff. Like bookkeeping is never something I'm super interested in, but I do love some of the problems or situations that come from bookkeeping. Like you find a dragon's hoard, how do you get it out? Or, you have three of your companions are unconscious and you have to get out of this area. How do you move them, right? Or like you can't bring your whole wagon up into the mountains to fight these guys. Like I love that kind of stuff, but I'm not like interested in sitting there and like, okay, well if Groggar can carry 30 pounds and Tim Burton can carry three, then we'll separate his staff onto his and like whatever. But the core of my pitch, I suppose, or what I dream of in my little DM slumber is I like when characters are like grounded and realistic and believable. And while you can achieve that with high fantasy characters for sure, I think you lose so much grit by like having them be able to do all these fantastical things or having so many options or choices that like it's almost like over stimulus, so they just kind of resort to doing this like one very effective thing and then forget about thinking outside the box or leveraging different aspects of the game. I know I'm ranting about a lot of it, but I feel like this fundamentally helps shape the game in like a really cool way. But yeah, everyone likes their fucking super powerful wizard that can polymorph a dragon into a rabbit, and like everyone loves playing the druid that can be a tank and fight 700 different enemies and take on an army by himself. And it's like, I just want to play a game where an infection makes you lose a limb and you got to deal with the horrible mental torture of now being disabled as an adventurer for the rest of your life. Like the good old days, man.
So yeah, I was gonna kind of prompt you there because when you've talked about it in the past,
Mhm.
you specifically sort of highlighted like uh the idea that grievous injuries are not only possible but probable.
Mhm.
They don't go away with a long rest.
Mhm. But
Um, there's a lot of real risk of death,
mhm.
and people should have multiple characters waiting to bring them in, to rotate them
Mhm.
in.
Also, like the immediately I think a lot of people think like, oh, he's just like a meat grinder DM. He just wants to like see his players put through the shredder and come out the other side looking like, paper mache or whatever. That's not really the case. What I think drives me so closely to like being latched onto this concept is if you think about, the realism or the believability of these things, right? If someone's going out adventuring and like, surviving all these harrowing trials, like there should be scars and signs of wear and tear and like their joints should creak and like, that there should be chips cut out of their ears, scars on their face. Like, I don't know, like it almost kind of helps really make that brush with death all that much more like visceral because there is that brush with death. You're not just like, oh yeah, we went and took out a goblin camp, that's just a regular Tuesday. Let's go get paid and then go hit the tavern. Like in my mind, it's like, oh, we made it through another one, boys. It's like Timmy's a little worse for wear, but that's just another battle scar to add to his collection. The chicks will dig this when we get to the tavern. Like I don't know, like that kind of shit. Like I like playing people or interacting with people, and I think with a lot of like modern day D&D groups we're kind of losing the people aspect of characters. But like this is not a hill that I would necessarily die on because we play a game that's very much more leaning towards high fantasy and kind of traditional D&D, but I think injecting this here and there would be awesome.
The tricky part about the gritty realism game, I really feel like there's a bell curve when it comes to death in your game. And on the one end, death doesn't matter because it's easily thwarted
Hmm.
by magic, by healing, by taking a long rest. And then on the other end, death doesn't matter because it happens all the time.
Hmm.
It's like I
You go into a room expecting like, oh, there's probably a pit trap here that will kill me.
it's sort of like people talk a lot about the Souls games
Hmm.
and they're lauded for their sort of difficulty and how they make you work for it, which is true. But dying in a Souls game is a joke.
Hmm.
Uh, it is a meme because it happens so much,
Hmm.
and it isn't. It you die a lot, and death is not meaningful. Oh, I lost my souls.
Hmm.
Well, back to the time to beat my head against this boss for the 20th time.
Hmm.
Um, so there's kind of that bell curve there, and you want to get somewhere in the middle where interesting stories can still happen, interesting characters can still develop, um, and you don't help me out here. I'm
You want to make it so that the players are connected to their characters so that they're invested in their characters and they don't go into it thinking like, oh, I know this is just disposable man 3.5, like, this is Jim Bob, the man who slayed the fucking crooked nose McGee and like he's, survived this long and done these things and has all these goals, but it's difficult to find that middle ground because as soon as a player dies for the first time after being heavily invested into a character, there's that like moment of realization of like, oh, I have to do this all over again. I don't know if I can get invested. What if I get invested? And then it's just the rug's pulled out from under me. Um, but if you're on the other side of that spectrum, it's just like, I don't want to get invested at all because I know they're gone. So you want to hit that middle ground. And I think it's difficult, I think more with newer players or players that haven't had their games end in their character dying, where their group just kind of fell apart because, scheduling conflicts or something. And so all their characters have always survived somehow or never been faced with like losing and moving on. Because, grieving realistically in the real world is not a fun activity to do. So to try and inject that into a game that's supposed to be fun is very difficult to handle realistically and continue being fun. And I think that's honestly probably the biggest aversion to gritty realism or that general concept is like, I don't want to deal with a broken leg and have all these disadvantages for this lengthy period of time. I don't want to sit for a fucking week, nursing an injury or like dealing with the, purple flu or whatever the hell. Like, because I'm escaping those things in real life to go play this fantasy game, which I understand. So,
Everybody around the table, not just the DM, everyone's downtime game would have to be on point.
mm-hmm.
Um, you would have to have activities that were meaningful that you could do while you were waiting for your broken leg to be
Mm-hmm.
serviceable again. The characters would have to have interaction. I'm gonna say off screen,
Mm-hmm.
that was pushing some part of the narrative forward. Um, that that is that's what would make or break a gritty realism game,
Mm-hmm.
because a 5 minute workday is still a 5 minute workday, whether 24 hours pass in campaign time or 2 weeks pass in campaign time.
Mm-hmm.
If all you're doing is saying a bigger number when you say I'm resting,
Mm-hmm.
then there is no point.
I think
Uh,
the like utopian vision I have of this is like almost using like Telora again for an example. When you guys go out on an adventure or an arc or a contract and someone suffers an injury, which, hasn't really happened yet, except, them dying, that is now like a issue that is going to persist for the rest of that arc. And then once you get back to like, your home base or a place where you can rest, then you can kind of reset. And so it's more of like this is now a complication added to whatever else was going on, and we understandably will move past it once their time allows for it. But that's like the cool like addition that I think could be added and make more complicated or convoluted or challenging scenarios, without it being like, oh, you know, Jim broke his arm. We got to go back. We got to call this one quits and go sit for 2 minutes. That's actually 10 weeks in game and then try again. I think it's all a matter of like how you handle it. But I think the second main rant that I want to get in before we eventually conclude in our ramblings, the other pet peeve of mine that I have for doing a lot of high fantasy D&D, and also this is a bit of like 5e bloat issue as well, is God, I wish we had a more limited magic system where like it was more clear and defined and structured about like what you can do and what class can do what and like how limited they are, because there are some parties that are just near invincible and you really got to throw the book at them to even like vaguely challenge them. And it just, for me at least, and this is what I kind of mentioned earlier, there's so many options that they have when you sit down as a DM and look over everyone's character sheets and you're like, I didn't even know they could do this. When was like the last time they used this? Oh, fuck, never, because they have this spell that, works for every single thing that they have. And then you ask them like, why haven't you used this? It's like, oh, I forgot I had that. And it's like, why don't you, use this class feature? Oh, well, I have 7 other that are, way better, and I only have 1 slot, so I just use the best one. And it's like, yeah, man, I wish we could just bring it back down to like a simpler thing where the solution wasn't looking to some power on your character sheet, but figuring out the problem. Whether it's a combination of bringing in story elements or allies or, a crazy plan or combinations of people's abilities. I think we lose out a lot of that in our, modern D&D that we kind of play now, where it's just like, oh yeah, this guy has that ability that will handle this, and then I'll go in and do this, and then if anything else happens, then we have that guy who can just bring us right back, and then we'll just repeat until we win. So, yeah.
yeah, the path of least resistance is is uh is a thing, and it's hard sometimes to remember as a group that isn't like, you want to be effective, but you also want to be interesting and having fun and causing strange wrinkles to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I think what you are, I feel like one of the core elements, if we were to boil it down, of what you're asking for or dreaming about, is some real maturity, for lack of a better word. Like some seasoned, tabletop players that are looking for all different kinds of fun. Uh,
I think maturity might not be the word I use, but more coordinated or maybe complex or involved would be like terms I'd throw around. Like the there's a very like surface level interaction when you're just playing to be effective versus when you're playing to, I don't know, like really get into it, really play the character that you're playing versus playing the character sheet that you're playing.
yeah, that I don't have anything else to add to that. Just um, I was thinking about, just to circle back for a second. I was thinking about, I'd be willing to bet, no evidence at all, nothing scientific about this, just off the top of my head, but I'd be willing to bet that a lot of groups fall into this pattern that is pretty similar to what I understand from Critical Role, which is early in the campaign, there is a death,
Mm-hmm.
and that one death becomes everything. Like, that is, all the drama hangs on that, and um it's early in the campaign because the levels are lower and it's easier to die and
You kind
harder
of
to
become this like saint figure or this martyr.
survive. And
Mm-hmm.
that one death becomes the death of the campaign. Not the
Mm-hmm.
death of the campaign, but the
Yeah,
death
yeah.
in the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And um nobody really dies after that. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's the one that the party always looks back to, and like, we're doing this for you, Molly
Mm-hmm.
Mock.
Well, people
Uh,
would die, but then immediately get brought back.
but then
Usually,
yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't have the same
Mm-hmm.
punch, because it doesn't last.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it was like our
but
third or fourth video we did on Resurrection, and we had this same kind of conversation. Yeah.
yeah, yep. And I'm gonna avoid like ragging on Critical Role for that. Go back to that video. I do a pretty decent rant on them, but um, really, I'm ranting on you. I'm just using them as the material, as the thread. But anyway, uh, you know what time it is, or if you don't, you should. If you don't know, now you know. It's time to like and subscribe,
There it is.
and go down to those comments and let us know the thing that would just make you so tickled and give you the warm fuzzies forever, but the group's just not into it.
Mm. I
Or
think
the D.
everybody has like I can't imagine there's like a player or DM out there that's like, nope, every single thing I like is in my game.
Yep. There's nothing I would want to include that isn't already in
Mm.
that.
Man, if I could just get
So,
rid of magic items, oh boy. Oh.
oh man.
It's all
Oh,
cursed items and broken rusty daggers, boys. Get ready.
we should just have like a bonus episode of just bickering back and forth about your weird hangups and preferences. And I'm
Yeah, we clash a fair bit on our D&D utopias.
Yeah, I have some too. I know that I
Mm.
do.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's hear it in the comments. Do it. Do it. We know that you've got something to say. Don't be
Mhm.
shy. And come back next week and we're going to do it again.
There you go.
Until next time.
Have a good one.